The New England morning opened with a thin layer of mist clinging to the maple treetops. The early sunlight filtered through, so gentle and clear one could almost hear the wind breathe. Inside the coastal Cape Cod-style house, the pendulum clock chimed slowly. Time passed as if waiting for someone to finally open their heart and confront it. Eleanor Vance sat before her late husband's desk. She still called him Robert Never. Rob Honey, or Dear, as people in love often did. Theirs had been a disciplined, grounded love marked by silences that lasted longer than words. 6 months after his death, the room still held the scent of his aftershave, the smell of paper and the leather from his old chair. Everything in the room seemed frozen in the... Her eye stopped on her wedding photo with Robert, a man with a confident smile, a young woman looking at him with absolute trust. Back then, she thought we were foolish to believe that love was enough to keep everything steady. The sound of waves echoed through the window. A seagull cried somewhere on the roof. Ellie sighed, leaning back in the chair. Every morning was the same, waking up in a house that was too big. Drinking coffee in silence, organizing papers with no purpose. When Robert was alive, he decided everything from the budget to the choice of coffee blend. She had felt secure letting him hold the reins. Now that emptiness felt like a bottomless chasm that nothing could fill. She looked. The screen displayed the name her heart still both loved and feared, Chloe Hayes. Her hands froze, her heart pounded, and she took a long, deep breath. For the past 6 months, Chloe had barely called. Occasionally there was a short text like, "Are you okay?" or "Busy, talk later." The last time they met was at Robert's funeral. Amidst the grief and the funerary flowers, Chloe stood there in an expensive dress, tears dry on her cheeks, her gaze lost. Ellie tried to take her daughter's hand, but she recoiled as if burned. She picked up, trying to make her voice sound as natural as possible. "Hello, Chloe. I was just about to call you. How are you, sweetie?" Her daughter's voice came through cold and smooth as the surface of a stone. "Mom, I called to tell you the news." Marcus and Ellie forced a small, strained laugh, thinking she must have misheard. "Sold, Chloe? What are you talking about? That house is your father's legacy. It's where you grew up, where we had our first Christmas together. You have no right to sell it, my girl." On the other end, there was only the sound of rustling paper, a steady, chilling breath. Then Chloe's voice came as calm as if discussing a business deal. "You signed the full power of attorney 6 weeks ago. Remember I said it was to help you handle some financial matters after Dad passed. I've transferred a small sum to you. You don't need to worry. Marcus and I have a huge investment opportunity. You should be happy for me." Ellie felt the blood drain from her face. Every word hit her chest like a blow. Ellie had signed without looking closely, out of trust, out of love, thinking it was a way for her daughter to feel responsible. Now that trust turned into a dagger aimed at her own heart. "Chloe, her voice caught, "you lied to me. You knew I would never agree if you told me the truth." "Lie," Chloe scoffed, a short, hollow laugh. "Mom, this is the real world. You can't hold onto a house just to hug the past. I need the money and I know how to use it better. You should trust me." Her voice came out frail but firm. "Your father would never. Dad is dead?" "Mom," Chloe cut her off, cold and decisive. "And I'm not going to live his way, being poor because of old-fashioned principles. Don't be dramatic. I have to go now. I wish you all the best." Then the dry, abrupt beep, beep sounded. For a few seconds she heard nothing but the pounding of her own heart. No tears, no sobs, just the absolute silence of someone who had just lost something money could not buy back. She looked at the wedding photo on the desk. Robert smiled in the frame. His eyes then were bright, as if he knew everything she had never dared to think about. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered. "You knew she would do this." A gust of wind blew, scattering a few papers on the desk. Ellie stood up and walked slowly toward Robert's closet. She opened the door, running her hand along the row of suits he used to wear. The familiar scent of his cologne still lingered. In the far corner there was a locked drawer. She took the key and opened it. On the envelope, she recognized the slanted handwriting, even in the dark. "For Eleanor, if you're reading this is time." Her hands trembled as she opened the letter. "My brave Ellie, if you are reading this, it means what I feared most has happened. If Chloe's greed has hurt you, do not despair. I have left you something they cannot take away the truth. Find Mr. Graham in Boston. He will help you activate the Renaissance Trust. Use it not to punish, but to teach. I trust you, and I believe that one day she will understand." She read it twice, her eyes blurring. The constriction in her throat felt like she was being squeezed. Robert, her understanding husband who was so cautious she had once accused him of being too careful, had, it turned out, prepared for this very moment. Each file was individually encrypted, but a summary dashboard displayed the final figure: total asset value $1.2 billion USD. A gasp escaped her mouth, half surprise, half fear. Robert had left her not just a material legacy, but a colossal block of power. She scrolled through another file, Clause 7, Heir Restriction. Any heir engaging in fraudulent, misappropriative, or exploitative behavior regarding Eleanor Vance's assets shall be permanently disinherited. Eleanor let out a shaky, tear-filled laugh. "You were always one step ahead, Robert. Even when I was weak, you protected us." She leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. In that moment, all pain subsided, replaced by something else, a chilling clarity. The sea wind whistled through the window frames, the sound of the waves like a slow, steady heartbeat. When dawn broke, she was dressed, her hair neatly tied back, and she called the man Robert had mentioned countless times Graham. "Mr. Graham," she said when he answered. "I am Eleanor Vance." "Robert said you would understand if I called?" On the other end, the man's voice was deep and calm. "I understand, Mrs. Vance. Robert left specific instructions. I presume the time has come." "Yes," she replied. "I need to see you immediately. We have work to do." 3 days later, Eleanor was in a high-rise office in downtown Boston. The large window overlooked the harbor where white ships drifted silently. Graham, a gray-haired man, solicitously pulled out a chair. "The house in Nantucket and the car are just minor, negligible assets?" Eleanor nodded. "So the power of attorney Chloe has is only valid for those small things?" "Precisely. Legally, she could only sell the symbolic items. The rest, nearly all of the family's wealth, remains under your control." Eleanor was silent for a few seconds. The sunlight hit her cheekbones, creating a thin, scar-like line of light. "Good," she said quietly. "Now it's our turn to act. I want to maintain the image of a destitute widow abandoned by her daughter. I need your help to keep that facade perfect." Graham raised an eyebrow. "What do you intend to do, Mrs. Vance?" "Not revenge," she replied, her voice sharp as steel. "I am going to teach her a lesson she will carry for the rest of her life." "What kind of lesson?" "That money is not. It belongs to Phoenix Holdings, a subsidiary of the trust." "Exactly. Send the foreclosure notice. Don't rush it, but be certain. Let them feel the ground slowly slipping away beneath their feet, without understanding why." She stood up, looking out the window. Boston Harbor sparkled under the sun. "She thinks I'm weak, but she never understood some women are most dangerous when they are silent." Late afternoon. Eleanor returned home, brewed a cup of chamomile tea, and placed it before Robert's photo. The sunset cast a long light through the window, making his picture glow as if he were smiling. She gazed at it for a long time, then spoke softly. "My dear, I won't let hatred turn me into someone else." Eleanor took a sip of tea. The mint flavor was cool and bitter on her tongue. In her eyes, the pain had given way to something else, fortitude. She set the cup down, her voice a soft vow. The game has begun, my darling Chloe, and this time I'm the one holding the pieces. Outside, the sea wind blew stronger. The waves crashed 2 weeks after the fateful phone call. The Boston winter reached its peak. Wind from the Charles River howled through the cobblestone streets, lashing passers-by like icy whips. The bare black trees stood silently, watching the snow accumulate on their shoulders like mute witnesses to the life of Eleanor Vance, the woman quietly beginning a new chapter. Eleanor rented a small apartment on the south side of the city in an old time-worn complex. The apartment had only 2 rooms, low ceilings, and creaky wooden floors with every step. Light from a narrow window fell onto an empty kitchen table, where only a cold cup of tea and a stack of unopened bills lay. Everything was perfectly arranged, perfect for the role she was about to play. "Vance, is that you? Heard your daughter took all your money and left. Is that right?" A red-haired woman at the fish stall asked, her voice low but loud enough for those nearby to hear. Eleanor just gave a faint smile and bowed her head. "Old age, my dear. Everyone has to learn to stand alone sometime." No one knew that this woman with a bag of cheap vegetables in her hand was controlling an empire worth over $1 billion through a network of lawyers, shell companies, and trusts in various countries. No one knew that when night fell in that dim apartment, the glow of her laptop screen reflected on her composed face, while lines of financial code moved continuously, like blood flowing through the veins of a sleeping beast. Eleanor knew that in the pity of others she found the safest shield. No one is wary of those they pity. She had told Graham, and he had simply nodded, understanding that the game was on. During the first days of her new role, Eleanor kept everything slow and steady. In the morning, she walked to the small neighborhood library where an extra pair of hands was always needed to organize books and dust shelves. The wages were just enough to buy a little food and tea, but she didn't mind. She liked the feeling of being called Miss Ellie by people who didn't know her past. They saw her as a kind-hearted, slightly reserved woman with eyes that were too deep, too sad. In the evening, she volunteered at St. Andrew's Church soup kitchen. Once, a drunk man chuckled wildly. "You have the look of someone who has lost everything." Eleanor just smiled, replying softly, "And the look of someone who knows she still has everything that truly matters." He didn't understand, but she did. In Boston, it snowed for days straight. Every time the wind blew, clumps of snow flew up, swirling like smoke. She stood by the window, looking out at the street, remembering the old house in New England, where light once flooded every corner, where Robert still read the paper every morning. She remembered his voice, his last words before he died. "Never let your kindness be mistaken for weakness." She hadn't forgotten. Occasionally at night, she received calls from Graham. They spoke briefly and efficiently, like 2 people running a covert. "Let everything happen naturally. She needs to believe it's just a commercial mistake." "And Marcus Hayes?" Graham asked. "He's a pragmatist," she replied. "When the money disappears, he will disappear too. That is certain." On the other side of the country, her words began to materialize. The penthouse apartment in Manhattan, where Chloe lived with Marcus, was still lit up every night, but the laughter was gone. Yellow light reflected off scattered wine bottles. Bank envelopes lay torn open on the floor. Marcus sat on the couch, phone in hand, his eyes red from lack of sleep. Chloe emerged from the bedroom, wearing a silk robe and holding a glass of wine. "What is it this time?" Marcus slammed the phone onto the table. "What is it? Phoenix Holdings just sent a notice of termination on— You said the lease was renewed." Marcus let out a wild, strained laugh. "The lease? You thought you were so smart? You signed everything without reading? All you wanted was a luxurious place to show off to your friends? You have no idea who is really behind Phoenix, do you?" Yeah, Chloe felt her chest tighten. "What do you mean?" Marcus stood up and walked closer, his eyes dark. I think you know, Phoenix isn't a random company. The person running it knows your every move. Who knows you better than your own mother, Chloe? She backed away, trembling. You're lying. My mother would never. Never, Marcus interrupted, a dry smile on his face. You don't know her. You thought she was weak, but I saw something very cold in her eyes. The quiet, most dangerous kind of person. He turned, putting on his coat. I'm not staying to be dragged down with you. Chloe stood motionless, the light casting a pale glow on her face. She looked around the paintings, the expensive decorations. The clothes all suddenly became meaningless. She knelt on the floor, hands clutching her head, sobs bursting out like a forsaken child. For the first time in her life, Chloe understood what loss meant. Not just losing money, but losing status, losing control, losing all faith in herself. In Boston, Eleanor received a call from Graham. His voice was deep and cautious. Phoenix has completed the procedure. Marcus Hayes has left the country, probably for the Caymans. Chloe is in a state of panic. Reports show she tried to contact you at least 3 times, but didn't dare send a message. Eleanor was silent. Look, when everything collapses and only oneself remains, that's when people begin to see the truth. And you? Do you plan to talk to her? Eleanor sighed. Not yet. If I appear now, she'll cling to me. She has to fall on her own to understand the price of climbing back up. After hanging up, she stood up and walked to the window. The snow was falling heavier, whitening the entire sky. On the street, the shimmering car lights reflected through the sleet. Eleanor closed her eyes and whispered, Robert, do you see? She's shattering. But she needs to break to be mended. She sat down and poured some tea. In that refined bitterness, she felt something very real. Something money could not buy, the right to choose how to love. The screen displayed a series of missed calls Marcus creditors the bank. She didn't dare open any of the messages. Everything had happened too fast. Just 3 days ago, she was sitting with Marcus, planning their own investment fund, talking about the future long trips and a life of freedom. Now it had all vanished, leaving only a dreadful emptiness in her chest. She looked around the apartment. Everything had been meticulously chosen, the abstract paintings, the Italian leather chair, the fine wine bottles. All of it now seemed laughably fake. Chloe suddenly realized she had never felt this place was home. Everything was just a beautiful veneer covering the emptiness she tried to hide. She had thought she was free when she left her mother. The yellow lamplight, her mother's voice, hoarse from sleeplessness, her trembling hand holding the pen. It's just a formality, Mom. I just want to help. Chloe had believed she was doing the right thing, or at least she had convinced herself of it. But deep in her heart, she knew she was exploiting trust. And now the truth was demanding its full price. A ring at the doorbell startled her. A man in a gray suit stood outside holding a thick envelope, his face expressionless. Miss Hayes. I'm from Phoenix Holdings. I need you to sign the apartment surrender confirmation. Chloe tried to remain calm. That's impossible. I'm disputing this. My lawyer... Your lawyer has withdrawn from the case. The contract has been terminated. This property is no... Chloe stood still, her back against the wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. 24 hours. Each word hammered in her head. She sank onto the floor, looking at the apartment around her, her world, the life she had proudly shown her mother. Now it was all just someone else's house. That evening she opened the last bottle of wine and drank a long draught. The liquor burned her throat, but it wasn't enough to soothe the fear. She picked up her phone, looking at her mother's number. Her fingers trembled, dialing, then stopping. She heard her mother's voice in her head, calm, warm, forgiving. You can tell me the truth, Chloe. But how could she tell the truth when the truth was so ugly? She put the phone down, buried her head in her hands, and cried. Hello. Her daughter's voice was choked, punctuated by the sound of rain. Mom, I'm at the Miami airport. Marcus left me? I have nothing left. I was wrong, Mom. I'm sorry. Eleanor closed her eyes. A sharp pain shot through her heart. She wanted to say, I forgive you, but she couldn't. Forgiveness now would only kill the lesson. Daughter, she said, her voice slow and calm. I don't have any money left. I'm working at the library now, but your room is still here. If you need a place to stay, just come home. On the other end, there were only sobs. I'm coming right away. I just need you, Mom. The call ended. Eleanor placed the phone on the table, her hand trembling slightly. Outside, the wind blew, bringing the first snow of the season. She lit a candle before Robert's photograph and said softly, Do you see she's coming back? Not as a seeker of forgiveness, but 3 days later, the door to the small Boston apartment opened. Chloe stood outside, her hair wet and clinging to her face, dragging a suitcase, her thin coat soaked. When Eleanor opened the door, they looked at each other, neither speaking for a few seconds. Time seemed to freeze between them. Then Chloe burst into tears, hugging her mother, trembling like a child. Eleanor placed her hand on her daughter's back, hugging her in return, not with warmth, not with anger, but with the embrace of someone who had loved and been betrayed. That night, as Chloe slept in her old room, Eleanor stood in the hallway watching the light spill out from beneath the door. She smiled. The Boston night was quiet, the faint moonlight shining through the frosted window. In the small apartment, Eleanor sat in a chair by the radiator, a thin blanket over her knees. The flickering firelight reflected in her eyes, two small points of light in the darkness. In the next room, Chloe's steady breathing was faint, like the familiar heartbeat she used to know when her daughter was a child nestled in her arms. For 6 months, she hadn't heard that breath, 6 cold months, where every minute felt heavy as stone. Now that her daughter was back, she thought she would feel relief, but there was only a vague emptiness in her heart. Eleanor was not a cruel person. She never had been. But love, Robert had once said, when a child loses their moral compass, the first fault belongs to the mother. She had been angry at that statement, thinking he was too harsh. Now she knew he was merely predicting the future. She stood up and walked to Chloe's door. The light from the nightstand cast a faint glow inside. Chloe lay on her side, face toward the wall, her hair spread on the pillow. She was curled up like a lost child. Beside the bed, the suitcase was still unopened. Eleanor watched her daughter for a long time. In those tired features, she could still glimpse the image of the 10-year-old girl who used to dance in the white chrysanthemum garden, who used to smile radiantly when Robert lifted her off the ground. But the light in that smile had been gone for a long time. Was she going too far? Was the way she let Chloe lose everything? Taste despair truly the only path to awakening? Or was it just her way of revenge cloaked in the moral guise of education? She had no answer. The wind whistling through the door crack carried the faint sound of a distant church bell. Eleanor sat down, sighing softly. There were moments she wished Robert were still alive so he could hold her hand so they could share this burden. But he was gone, and all that remained was the legacy of their love. Not the money, but the responsibility for the soul of their only child. The next morning, Eleanor woke up early. She brewed coffee, the aroma gently filling the room. Chloe emerged, her eyes swollen, hair messy. Eleanor poured coffee into her daughter's cup. Did you sleep? Chloe nodded. Thank you, Mom, for letting me come back. Eleanor looked at her daughter, her voice composed. I once thought I would never open the door to you again. But then I remembered Robert. He always believed everyone deserves a second chance. I don't deserve it. None of us truly deserve it, Chloe. Forgiveness isn't about the deserving. It's about the forgiver seeking peace. Chloe lowered her head. Mom, I don't know where to start. I used to think I was strong. I thought money was enough, that I didn't need anyone, but when I lost everything, I realized I was nothing. Marcus left, my friends avoided me, and the first person I thought of was you. So I chose a different way to let you hate yourself. Chloe looked up, tears streaming down her face. I hurt you so much, Mom. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want a do-over, even if it's from scratch. No one ever starts from scratch, Eleanor said quietly. Even when you lose everything, you still have yourself. The question is, do you still know who you are? The question silenced Chloe. She looked at her hands, fingers once accustomed to phones, meetings, and parties. Now they were trembling and rough. I don't know, Mom, but I want to find the person I used to be before I became like this. Eleanor stood up, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. If you truly want to, I will give you a chance, but you have to. I don't know if I can do that. No one knows what they can do until they're forced to. Eleanor replied, her voice low but warm, and now is the time for you to learn. That day, Chloe walked out of the house for the first time since she returned. The weather was cold, the wind biting. She walked to the small downtown area with the grocery store, a coffee shop, and a family restaurant. A sign hung on the door, hiring, part-time cleaner. She stood looking at it for a long time before pushing the door open. The owner, an older woman with dark skin named Patricia, looked her up and down and asked, Have you done this work before, Chloe? She shook her head. No, but I can learn. Patricia smiled lightly. Eleanor watched her daughter quietly walk in, tired, but with a different look in her eyes, less frantic, something more real. She smiled. How was the first day harder than I thought? But I feel more authentic than ever. Eleanor nodded, her voice light as a breath. That's what it feels like when you begin to pay back the debt to yourself. That night, after Chloe was asleep, Eleanor sat alone by the window, writing a few lines in her journal. Today she started over. No more makeup, no more lies. Only sweat in her hands. Perhaps Robert was right. True love isn't unconditional indulgence. It's daring to let the one you love face the consequences of their own actions. She closed the journal and turned off the light. March arrived, bringing the first warm gusts of the Boston spring. The snow melted, revealing patches of fresh green grass. Along the streets, the maple trees began to bud, and the sky was no longer a dull gray blanket. Winter was over. For Eleanor, it was more than just a change in weather. It was a sign of life that even the most broken things could be resurrected if one was patient enough to wait. Chloe had been working at the small restaurant for over a month. She woke up at 5 a.m, walking half an hour in the wind to get there. The work, cleaning, mopping floors, washing dishes left her back aching, her hands blistered, her nails broken, and her hair smelling of grease. But every morning when Patricia, the manager, smiled and said, "Good job today, kid," every time she saw Chloe return home tired, but with a peaceful look in her eyes, she felt a quiet joy. In the evenings, they ate dinner together, simple meals of soup, bread, and tea. The silences between them gradually became more comfortable. Sometimes Chloe would share small stories from the restaurant, a complaining customer, a young girl who dreamed of being a singer. Eleanor listened without judgment or lecturing. She knew this was not the time to teach. This was the time for her daughter to find her own soul. One evening, as they were washing dishes, Chloe said softly, "Mom, I applied to go back to school at Boston College. The major is law, focusing on financial abuse support for women. I want to help people like." I know I was selfish, but if I can use my mistake to save someone else from making the same one, then maybe I'm not completely useless. Eleanor put the plate down and dried her hands. You were never useless, Chloe. You just hadn't figured out what was worthy of your effort. The comment made Chloe smile a light, genuine smile. In that moment, Eleanor realized her daughter was truly changing not with an apology, but with action. Time passed and spring gradually filled the small apartment. The tulip bouquets Eleanor bought at the market bloomed their light scent like a promise of the future. Chloe began spending her evenings reading and taking notes. She took an extra night shift at the supermarket to save for tuition. One day, returning home late, she found her mother still awake reading Robert's letter. I used to be angry at him for always being so strict with me, but now I understand he was just afraid I would lose myself. Your father always believed you had fortitude, Eleanor said softly. He was just afraid pride would make you forget humility. Now you are finding the balance he wished for. They sat together silent. In the small room, the candle flickered, casting light on their faces, one old and experienced, the other young. One early April morning, Eleanor received an envelope from Graham. Inside was the financial report for the Renaissance Trust. A line at the bottom of the letter made her pause. Per the regulations, Miss Chloe Hayes, having demonstrated the capacity for self-reliance, may have her subsidiary inheritance rights in the trust reinstated. She put the letter down on the table, looking out the window. Outside, cherry blossoms were in full bloom, their pink petals fluttering in the wind. Each petal fell like a fragment of memory dissolving. She thought about the past months, tears, anger, silence, forgiveness. It all felt like a closed life cycle, leaving behind only one thing: growth. That afternoon, Chloe returned, her face flushed from the wind. She didn't say congratulations, didn't say I'm proud, but simply walked over and hugged her daughter. This embrace was different from the first one when Chloe returned. No stiffness, no heaviness, only pure, unconditional love. After holding her for a long time, Eleanor whispered, "Do you see, life didn't take everything from you. It only took what wasn't real and gave me something truer back." A month later, Graham came to visit. He sat across from Eleanor in the living room, his sharp eyes behind his glasses. "I have to say you did what few could: disappear from public life while controlling an entire complex financial structure. Robert would be proud." Eleanor smiled. Proud not because of the money, Graham, but because she found herself. He always said any child can get lost as long as they know the way home. And will you let her know the truth? "Not yet," Eleanor replied. "When she understands the value of labor, when she helps enough people, when her heart is no longer clouded by money, then she will know." Graham nodded. "So you are still teaching the final lesson?" "No," Eleanor answered, her voice softening. "The final lesson." They sat across from each other, the distance between them gone. "Mom," Chloe said, "I want to say thank you for not abandoning me, for letting me fall but still being here when I wanted to stand up." Eleanor took a sip of wine, her eyes gentle. "You don't need to thank me. I just did what any mother would do when there was no other way: love you by causing you pain." Chloe smiled, her eyes reflecting a peace she'd never had before. "You know what, Mom? I'm not afraid of losing money anymore. I'm only afraid of losing myself again one day." Eleanor looked at her daughter for a long time, then smiled. "In that case, you're wiser than I am, Chloe." Late at night. Outside, Boston slept soundly. Eleanor opened. The sight made her remember Robert. He had once said, "One day she will make you proud, not because of her success, but because of how she faces failure." Now she knew that day had arrived. She turned back to the desk and opened the old journal. On a new page she wrote, "The winter has ended. In the cold snow, 2 women found their reason to love again." None of us are perfect, but perhaps it is that very imperfection that makes love trustworthy. Eleanor put down the pen and smiled. In that moment, she was no longer a vengeful mother, no longer a grieving widow. She was simply Eleanor Vance, a woman who had once lost everything. The Boston morning was chilly, the sky clear after the night's rain. On the dining table, sunlight streamed through the window, shining on a still steaming cup of tea. Ellie was reading letters. Chloe emerged from her room, handbag in hand. She was neatly dressed, her hair tied back, her face slender but still bearing the marks of months of work. "I'm going to school early. There's orientation today?" Ellie nodded, not looking up. "Good. Keep going even if it's just one step at a time." Chloe smiled, then left. As the bus sound faded, Ellie sighed, her gaze sweeping over Robert's photo on the shelf. She spoke softly as if he were still there. "It's time, Robert." She's strong enough to know the truth. 3 days later, Ellie told Chloe to take the morning off from school to sign some papers regarding the remaining debt waiver for Marcus. Chloe was slightly worried but also reassured. She believed this was the final formality to close the past chapter. They went together to the law office of Graham and Associates. The building was tall with gleaming glass overlooking Boston Harbor. In the elevator, Chloe looked in the mirror, adjusting her hair. She didn't know that in a few minutes the entire world she believed in would be turned upside down. They were escorted to a conference room on the 21st floor. The room was luxurious, with a polished wooden table and large windows offering a view of the deep blue harbor. Graham stood up and shook hands with both of them. Graham gave a gentle smile. "Good. And perhaps this is the real beginning." He placed a thick file on the table, turning it toward Chloe. "Miss Hayes, I am pleased to inform you that you have been completely absolved of all debts related to Marcus Hayes. We proved he forged your signature on the loan agreements." Chloe looked up, startled, then cried tears of joy. "Oh my God, I'm free, Mom." She turned and hugged her mother. Ellie gently stroked her hair, her gaze both tender and profound. "You deserve that. But Chloe, there is one more thing. Something you need to hear." Her voice dropped and Graham understood. He opened a desk drawer and took out an old envelope sealed with red wax. "Miss Hayes, this is the original will left by your father, Robert Vance. No one except your mother and me has ever read it." Ellie looked up, her voice calm. "No, you only knew the part I allowed you to know. This is the rest." Chloe looked at the file. The first page stunned her. The capitalized text, "The Renaissance Trust, total asset value $1.2 billion USD. Her eyes widened, her voice trembling. $1.2 billion? How is that possible? Graham's voice was firm. Your father was a silent investor in technology and real estate projects. All profits were gradually transferred into this trust over 10 years. Everything was kept secret to protect the ultimate objective. Chloe turned to her mother, aghast. "Mom, you knew all along. That means you were never..." "Mom, you let me mop floors, work the night shift, live in that old apartment while you were a billionaire. Why? Why would you do that to me?" Ellie remained silent for a long time, then replied slowly, "Because you needed to know what it felt like to be stripped bare. You needed to know what it's like to stand up for yourself, what it's like to lose your dignity, and what it's like to reclaim it. You betrayed my trust, your father's trust, for a few luxuries and a dishonest man. You thought you had won, but in reality, you were just learning the first lesson." Chloe broke down in tears, collapsing back into her seat. "So, all of it, everything in New York, the foreclosed apartment, Phoenix Holdings, that was all you? Mom." Ellie nodded. "And I was the one who called Graham to ensure you could start over, but only once you had hit rock bottom." The room fell into silence. The tiny tick of the clock was clearly audible. Chloe looked up, her eyes wet with tears, her voice hoarse. I deserve that. I sold memories, sold trust, sold you, Mom, to buy an illusion. I deserve to lose everything. Ellie stood up, walked over, and placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. No, Chloe, you didn't lose everything. You still have a chance. Robert left one final condition in the trust. If you want to reclaim your honor, you must do this. She looked at Graham, who nodded and handed another document to Chloe. The final clause, he said. Miss Hayes, you are required to join the board of... After that, your inheritance status will be reviewed. Chloe read it, tears falling onto the paper. Dad believed I could change. Ellie smiled, her eyes glistening. He did, and so do I. But you have to prove it, not with words, but with action. Chloe clutched the paper, her voice trembling but resolute. I accept. I don't need the money. I just want a do-over to make amends. Ellie nodded softly, her hand gently squeezing her daughter's shoulder. Then, from today, you are no longer a fugitive. You are a woman rebuilding herself. As they stepped out of the building, the wind blew strongly from the harbor. Chloe looked up at the sky, the light reflecting in her tear-filled eyes. Mom, she said quietly, Dad left a tremendous lesson. Ellie, ships were anchored in the distance, waves crashing against the shore. Chloe looked down at her hands, hands that had once held money, once signed treacherous contracts, now trembling but clean. Ellie looked at her daughter, sensing what she had longed for all those months' true awakening. There was nothing left to avenge, only one thing left to do: forgive. That evening they returned home. In the yellow lamplight, Ellie placed a cup of tea in front of her daughter. Chloe said softly, I used to think you were cruel, Mom, but now I understand you just wanted to save me in the only way you could. Ellie, outside the sea wind blew again, carrying the smell of salt and moisture. In the small house, the two women sat together, one who had taught, one who was learning both. Understanding sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself again. Ellie looked out the window, speaking softly as if to herself. 6 months passed since that fateful morning at the law office when Chloe learned the truth about the trust and the harsh lesson her mother had taught her. Summer arrived, the New England sunlight vibrant and clear, reflecting on the surface of Nantucket Sound like shattered glass. On the road leading to the shore, new signs were erected. The Eleanor Vance Center for Recovery, a recovery center for women who have suffered financial abuse and loss of autonomy. The building, once the old Vance family house, was now painted cream white with a red tile roof and wide windows open to the sea breeze. But one thing hadn't changed. The soul of the house remained. In the yard, the lavender beds Robert had planted were now in full bloom, their gentle scent spreading over the cobblestone path. Chloe, she was leading a group of new volunteers, women who had their assets taken by former husbands, those who had just escaped debt, those who didn't know they had the right to start over. In their eyes, Chloe was a strong, calm, and warm leader. No one knew that this woman was once the very person who had lost everything because of her own greed. Inside the center's office, Ellie sat by the window, watching her daughter through the glass. She smiled. Every step Chloe took was now confident, no longer rushed, no longer arrogant. She spoke to people in a calm voice, her eyes focused on listening. This was what Ellie had prayed for her daughter for years, maturity that didn't come from... Ellie looked up, her eyes shining with joy. You did so well. Your father would be so proud if he were alive. Chloe gave a small smile. I'm still not a fraction of what you are. I'm only just learning how to manage, how to lead without imposing. Ellie stood up, walked closer, and gently adjusted her daughter's collar. No one is born knowing how to be a leader. But if you put your heart into every decision, you won't get lost. Chloe nodded. I still keep my cleaning job twice a week at the shopping center. People laugh, saying I don't need to anymore. but I can't quit. It reminds me of who I used to be." Ellie was silent for a few seconds, then gently held her daughter's hand. "Never be ashamed." Waves crashed against the rocks, shattering like the sound of the past hitting a memory, then fading away. Chloe stopped and looked at the old house, now the center where the laughter of women gardening cleaning rooms and learning trades echoed. "Mom," she said, "I used to hate this place. I thought it was just the old memory of a once happy family. But now I see it's the place where everything began." Ellie followed her gaze, her eyes warm. "This house has always been a symbol of recovery. It was once broken, but now it's a place of healing. Just like you." Chloe was silent for a moment, then continued. "I learned that true wealth isn't in a bank account. It's in the ability to forgive and being able to help someone else get back on their feet after they fall." Ellie smiled light as the wind. That's what the afternoon sun shone through, making both their hair gleam honey gold. In the distance, the blue sea stretched endlessly. Chloe stopped, turning to look at her mother. "Mom, I want to open an additional vocational training program for older women, those who are financially dependent on their husbands. They need to learn how to stand on their own again." Ellie nodded, her eyes brightening. "A wonderful idea. Let's call it the Phoenix Project, because you know from the ashes everything can be reborn." They both laughed. The sound of their laughter echoed, blending with the sound of the waves, warm and clear. A rare moment of peace in their stormy lives. Chloe looked at her mother, then turned toward the setting sun. The last light of the day stretched across the water, vibrant and that evening they attended the center's official opening ceremony. Attendees included donors, volunteers, and the women who had been helped. When the host invited Chloe to speak, she walked onto the platform, microphone in hand, looking around the brightly lit room. In that moment, she remembered everything: the arguments in Manhattan, the empty apartment, the nights spent cleaning floors, Patricia's voice, her mother's eyes in the darkness. She took a deep breath and said, "I once thought I lost everything. But it was only when I had nothing left that I realized I still had one precious thing, the chance to change. Today I stand here not because I am stronger than anyone else, but because someone taught me that love is not easy." When Chloe finished speaking, everyone stood up and applauded, the sound echoing like the sea waves outside, steady, strong, and clear. Ellie walked onto the stage and hugged her daughter. The two embraced tightly, the distance gone, no words needed to express the moment. After the ceremony, when everyone had left, Ellie and Chloe stood together on the porch, looking at the night sea. A full moon hung high, reflecting on the water. Chloe said softly, "Mom, I've been thinking about Dad. I understand now he didn't just leave money. He left a belief in kindness and a person's ability to change." Ellie smiled, her eyes on the horizon. "Your father used to say, people can buy everything except character and self-respect. Now you..." Chloe took her mother's hand and whispered, "I love you, Mom." Ellie turned, her eyes shining with pride and peace. "I love you too, Chloe, and your father does too." They embraced one last time in the silver moonlight covering the yard. Above, the stars shone brightly like fragments of memory, slowly finding their place in the sky. Below, the waves still crashed steadily, like the heartbeat of a love that had gone through loss, betrayal, and finally absolute forgiveness. That was the true legacy of the Vance family, not wealth, but the fortitude to lose everything